Great test administrators create a great testing environment. All students should have an equal opportunity to demonstrate their academic achievement. It is therefore critical for personnel participating in state mandated testing to provide the most secure, appropriate, and fair assessment experience. This requires any individual serving as a test administrator to be thoroughly knowledgeable of test administration procedures and to be aware of the proper action to take should an issue arise during an assessment. The lack of active monitoring can jeopardize the confidentiality of a state assessment or the validity of a student's test. Active monitoring means that test administrators should be actively engaged in observing students' behavior at all times during the administration of state assessments. Test administrators should not have their cell phones out, be on computers, reading unrelated materials, grading papers, accessing the internet, or engaging in non essential conversations. Test administrators should use their smartwatches as time devices only. Cell phones should not be used as a clock. It is too tempting to check emails, text messages, or get sidetracked into an online application. Test administrators may not take notes about test questions or observe test questions long enough to know the content of the test question itself, though a brief look at the device screen can alert the test administrator if the student is testing in the wrong content area. Active monitoring helps to ensure the standardization of statewide testing so that all students' test results are meaningful and valid. Failing to ensure proper oversight can limit the district's assurance that confidentiality has been maintained and can lead to the invalidation of students' tests and the loss of assessment opportunities. Active monitoring involves moving about the testing area so students' actions can be observed from multiple vantage points. Test administrators should not be engaged in other activities that would distract or prevent them from accomplishing this task. Because breaches in confidentiality can take place in a very short amount of time, test administrators must remain vigilant throughout the entire administration. Active monitoring means staying engaged in what students are doing while completing the test and keeping all of your activities relevant to the test administration. Test administrators must be able to address the needs of the students at different times during the assessment. Some examples may be students are ready to hand in their materials or submit their online answers, while others are busy working on their test, and others may be requesting a break or need questions answered about online test icons. Test administrators must be mindful of what's going on in the test session while attending to these individuals and position yourself to allow for the most effective angle of observation. Active monitoring entails more than simply moving about the room. Test administrators should be sufficiently engaged to ensure that students are following directions and working on the correct subject area assessment, especially if more than one test is assigned to a session ID. Test administrators must be aware that active monitoring also applies to test session time limits and testing breaks because STAAR assessments have specific time limits. Test administrators should use a clock or timer, not their cell phone, to monitor test time limits. Testing personnel are required to communicate orally or in writing the amount of time left to test in 1 hour intervals and shorter intervals during the last hour. During lunch and other breaks, and when escorting students to different locations, testing personnel must be near enough to students who have not finished testing to prevent discussions about assessment content. Proper monitoring by test administrator plays a critical role in protecting the confidentiality of state assessments and ensuring the validity of the student's test, and test administrators share the responsibility of enforcing proper testing procedures. Unauthorized viewing occurs when a test administrator views test content for any reason other than to ensure that students are working on the correct subject area assessment. Common examples of unauthorized viewing include viewing test content long enough to determine the essence of a secure item, such as looking at a test question at length over an examinee's shoulder, or viewing secure contents to determine whether a student marked responses, reviewing a student test scratch paper to ascertain his or her use of testing strategies, and memorizing test questions. Active monitoring involves acting responsibly to protect the confidentiality and ensure the proper administration of state assessments. Engaging in non monitoring activities such as reading, grading papers, checking emails, or texting could potentially distract test administrators or students and increase the possibility of improper behavior. A number of testing irregularities can be attributed to the inadequate monitoring of examinees. While outside of the testing area, remember that active monitoring applies to breaks such as lunch breaks, restroom breaks, and breaks when moving examinees to other locations. To help minimize risk associated with breaches in confidentiality, be aware of what students are doing, be aware of all local protocols and procedures concerning lunch breaks, restroom breaks, and escorting examinees. Test administrators are required to monitor their test sessions at all times. Failing to provide proper oversight could result in a breach of confidentiality. Reflect on the following scenario and observe how inadequate monitoring prevented Ms. Blake from detecting two students who compromised the validity of their assessments. Ms. Blake was assigned to administer a state math assessment. She started the test session by carefully distributing materials to each student and reading the instructions from the test administration directions. As the examinees began working, Ms. Blake walked around the room to confirm that they were all on task and following directions. The test session proceeded smoothly, and Ms. Blake was continuing to actively monitor when she realized she had forgotten to respond to an email from a parent. Because the students had been quietly focused on their test for over an hour, Ms. Blake thought it was a good time to send a quick response to the parent. She sat down at her computer, took another glance around the room to confirm that the examinees were on task. As Miss Blake turned to compose her reply, a student noticed that she was not paying attention and quietly signaled to a friend sitting next to him. The students checked to make sure that Miss Blake was still focused on her computer, then discreetly positioned his monitor so that his friend could see his responses. The friend compared the answers to his own and elected to change several of his responses. Detecting improper student behavior and intervening before the problem reaches a point where it cannot be rectified is critical. By properly monitoring a test session, it is expected that a test administrator will be able to detect and prevent improper student behavior. Many unnecessary and potentially detrimental consequences can be avoided if the test administrators are able to identify when a student has done something inappropriate and intervene before the situation reaches a point where the issue cannot be rectified. Be prepared and stay alert. Test administrators must make certain that students work independently so that they receive a fair and equitable opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge. This will also ensure that the results of statewide testing are meaningful and valid. Proper monitoring not only increases the likelihood of detecting cheating, but can also deter students from attempting such behavior. Be alert at all times while students are testing, taking breaks, including the lunch breaks, because breaks are common times when students might be tempted to discuss confidential test content. Most of the reported errors involving the use of unapproved materials were the result of poor communication. Test administrators must be instructed on what has been documented in student paperwork and allow those accommodations only during the test. Active monitoring is more than simply moving about the classroom. Test administrators must know what to look for in order to detect and prevent improper student behavior. Here's another example. Mr. Clark was assigned to administer the social studies state assessment. Mr. Clark is walking the room and glancing at student devices, but does not observe that one of the examinees is working on the mathematics portion of the assessment. The student was able to discreetly obtain a calculator from his backpack, and Mr. Clark missed another opportunity to detect inappropriate behavior by not questioning why the student would have a calculator during the social studies assessment. Detection and prevention of improper student behavior when it occurs is the key to a successful and valid administration. Failing to identify inappropriate student conduct increases the risk of a wide range of negative effects. Some of these consequences include the invalidation of the student's test and the loss of testing opportunities. Students should be focused on the task of completing their assessments, and test administrators should be focused on supporting this task. Test administration is a critical role to ensure students have the best opportunity to complete their assessment without any irregularities. If and when you have questions, please contact your CTC. If you are unsure of a student's action is an irregularity, contact your CTC. If you are unsure if an activity is allowed during testing, contact your CTC. Stay focused on the students. Do not let any other activity interfere with your attention to the proper test administration protocols. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for all that you do for our students and for helping to ensure that they have a fair and equal opportunity to complete their test.